All right, everyone, welcome back to our show. We're so excited that we're here and that you're here. And Dave, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Very excited to be back.
So what's new in life? I feel like every time we talk, we always go through this, but you always have just this monstrous to-do list and things in life going on.
Yeah, life has been crazy. We were finally able to get our daughter home, the one that we're in the process of adopting. We were finally able to get her out of the hospital on Friday, and it's been quite an experience. We've had a lot of fun going and doing different things with her and just making sure all of her needs are met.
That's great. I'm so glad to hear everything's worked out. It seems like it's been a long process. You've been part of this for a very long time.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see the government processes. I'm not here to beat up on that. We need to talk about retirement, but just how long it took. And now she's in our home, we've got people coming every day to see her. It's like, okay, so she's stuck in the hospital. Nobody wants to deal with her. Now we finally get her home and everybody wants to come over and see what's going on. So happy to have them. I mean, hey, she's in a great environment. My wife has definitely got a doctor's degree in parenting after 20 plus years of raising 6 children. So very excited to be able to have someone else in our lives that we can add value to our lives, and hopefully we can add value to theirs.
That's great. And for those watching live, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being part of the show with us. And again, like always, we are talking retirement. We get Dave on here and we ask him just a variety of questions. And Dave, I'm glad you brought up this, because in life, there's other things we have to deal with, not only at the beginning of stage, but the later part of life, and that's long-term care. And that's what I curated all these questions for today, pulled everything together so we could talk about this topic. And before we get into it, tell me, this comes from long-term care, a time bomb-free retirement, comes from one of your webinars, and maybe give us an idea of what this is.
Yes, it does come from one of the webinars that we put together here recently, because I realized it's such a big issue. When we look at it, many retirees don't realize that if they live to life expectancy, so 84 for a male, 88 for a female, you've got a 70% chance of needing long-term care coverage or having a long-term care event. That is huge. I mean, when we look at other insurances, we look at our home, the chance that we have our home burned down, 3% chance, but yet we all have fire insurance. Chance our car ends up being totally destroyed, 18% chance, yet we all have some type of auto insurance, and yet we get into retirement and we don't protect ourselves against a long-term care event that we've got a 70% chance of having happen to us if we reach life expectancy.
Dave, with this, I wanted to bring up our first question. And again, if you're watching live, go ahead and submit your retirement question. Even if it's not about long-term care, go ahead and get that question submitted, and we're going to go ahead and take a break and answer those. But right now, I've got a list of questions I have here for Dave. So Dave, what was the age again for females?
Yeah, 84 for a male, 88 for a female.
Okay, so I'm looking at this because Jay's saying my mother is 66. So is she too old to get long-term care coverage?
Yeah, she's not too old. I mean, she's got, in theory, another 22 years before she would end up having to use the coverage. Now, I will say, the older you get, the more expensive it's going to be. So the sooner you can get coverage, if you are going to use an actual long-term care policy. Now, I talk about the importance of using life insurance or the option to use it. Some of you may be able to even use annuities to help solve some of your long-term care issue because of the increase in payments. But if you're going to go with a sure, true long-term care policy, sooner you can get that, the cheaper it's going to be. But definitely would still be able to get one in your 60s, as long as there's not other health issues that are showing themselves. Now, there's no pre-existing condition rules, CR. So someone's got a bad hip, bad neck, maybe they're starting to have some mental issues. Age 66 may be very difficult to be able to buy a policy once you've gotten to that point.
So is there a perfect age to start with this long-term care coverage?
Yeah, my recommendation for most people is start somewhere between their 30s and 40s and only pay for a period of time. Now, those policies can be hard to come by because these companies realize how expensive long-term care is. But if you're going to go to a sheer long-term care policy, start early, go for a 10-year period of time, maybe a max 20-year period of time. You don't want to still be paying for insurance when you need the coverage from the insurance when you get into those retirement years.
Well, Dave, let's jump over to Stephanie's question now. And Stephanie's asking, are there tax benefits when paying long-term care premiums?
Yeah, when you look at it, it's going to be treated as health insurance. So very similar. So if you're able to take deductions because of your tax situation for health insurance contributions that you're paying in, you would be able to take those for your long-term care premiums.
And Dave, if we're looking at this, is there anybody else out there that's saying, "Hey, is I'm going to get a long-term care policy just for these benefits"? Is that going to be harmful?
No, there's just not enough benefits from a tax side for most people that it's really got to be a sheer I need to cover a long-term care event and I want to and the biggest thing is it's like you want to determine where you go. The government will take care of you. You don't have to worry about that if you don't have one of these policies, but you're going to spend down all your money and you're going to go into a Medicaid funded facility. So the purpose of long-term care is for you to be able to choose what you want to do in your situation where you go through that. And two, because you want to leave assets for someone else. If you don't want to do either of those, hey, don't worry about the long-term care policy and let Medicaid step in.
Dave, and you brought up Medicaid. And now, if we talk about this, I hope you can hear me okay. It's telling me my Wi-Fi is a little spotty.
Yeah, things are coming through clear from an audio, a little bit fuzzy, but hopefully not too bad going forward.
Long-term care, is it easy to get in? If we're talking, you could bring up Medicaid and there's so many other pieces. How do we make sure that we're going to do this right so we just don't show up and say, hey, I need help, and we're not really prepared for it?
Yeah, the biggest thing you got to do is you really need to look at a whole plan. I mean, it's a lot like a house. You go in and all of a sudden you just decide, hey, look, I'm going to put a bathroom up. Well, if you put the bathroom up and don't consider all of the other aspects of your home and where it fits and where plumbing and everything else might be, you're going to have a real issue potentially with what you did. Now, some people are going to get lucky or had enough knowledge that they'll be able to expand off from there. But it's the same way with retirement. Unfortunately, many of us just take segments of our retirement. We focus on that without looking at the overall picture. And we make bad decisions and we do things maybe we shouldn't, say, like a long-term care event. If you've got millions and millions of dollars, maybe long-term care insurance is really unimportant to you because you could easily cover that event and still have money left for a spouse or someone else you want to leave that money to.
I think that's such great advice. And for those, again, who are watching live, go ahead and submit your questions so Dave can pop on and answer those. And again, it doesn't always have to be on the subject we're talking about. It's just nice to have a good subject to talk about as we go through it and kind of pull out some of these unique pieces. And so again, today we're talking about long-term care. And with that one, Dave, I want to bring up Kapil's question. Can you have a modified endowment contract for a long-term care policy?
Yes, you can. And oftentimes when you look at if there's going to be an insurance piece to these, that's exactly what you've got. You're going to turn them into a modified endowment contract because you're not worried about the tax benefits or the tax structure of this. What you're looking at is the benefits of the insurance itself. I mean, when it's coming in, that you're going to have the coverage that you need to be able to cover this long-term care event.
And Dave, is part of this taxed as a gains as well as we're looking into this?
So say that again, please.
Is some of this part of is if I can get this without speaking too crazy, but when we're putting this as part of this is taxed as a gain when we're looking at if we're getting into these modified endowment contracts?
Well, the way they're structured is if you got a modified endowment contract, that basically if you've got profits on there, you would end up having to pay tax on those. But again, when you're looking at long-term care, the money's coming out to cover medical costs. So you've got an income coming out of there, but you also have an expense for the long-term care coverage. So this is where we're just not worried about whether it turns into a mech. And again, for most people, the way these are structured, you're not going to have to worry about it, but can happen, and definitely not against a Kapil if that needs to happen for a policy.
The reason I bring that up is because I wanted to pull up this other question from Henry, and he's saying, can health saving account funds accumulated be used to pay for the long-term care?
Yes, Henry, they can. And this is one of the reasons that many people promote, including myself, that you should fund these health savings accounts as much as you can and leave the money in there, because the cost of your care in retirement is going to be, for many people, far more damaging to their overall life structure than it is during your working years. For many people, especially when we talk to professionals that are getting six-figure salaries, for many of them, they can still afford to pay a contribution into an HSA account, but then also pay out-of-pocket costs. Well, once you get into retirement, all of a sudden you have a bundle of long-term care expenses or other health costs. If you don't have buckets to pull money from to cover these, you're going to be in a really tough situation, and you may be faced into that Medicaid facility.
And Dave, we do get a lot of people that either love those HSA accounts or they just don't like them. But in your regard, you're saying that this is a really good investment, especially as we're talking long-term care.
Yeah, but remember too, you made an important comment there, investment, and that's the other thing. Unfortunately, a lot of HSAs I see are just put in bank accounts. They're run by financial institutions, and so they get put into a checking account or a savings account that's making no money. You want those to be in the market. If you're going to use these for future retirement-based health insurance costs or health long-term care costs or out-of-pocket costs, whatever you're using it for, but you have somewhere in the future you want to use it, you need to invest that money wisely so you're outpacing inflation and you're getting some type of increase on there.
Yeah, I love that advice. Dave, let me jump over to Jay's question. He's asking, what is the breakdown rate to buy long-term care or take the premiums and invest? As we're bringing up investment, so I'm trying to make sure these questions are kind of following our conversation here.
Yeah, so it's going to be different for everyone, but I'll tell you, I've done the math on this, and you can't get to a break-even point really on these policies because remember, the insurance companies have a bundle of people that aren't going to use these. Yes, they're going to have 30% that get to full retirement age that didn't have to use it, 50% that died before then that most of them aren't going to have to use it. And you've got people that are going to pay for 10 years and not be able to continue the payments and they just drop out. So insurance companies have multiple streams of money coming in, and you're using the people who didn't pay, end up continuing to pay or didn't use the product, you're using their benefits. So there's really not a break even. I run the numbers on this, said, hey, could I just take my own money instead of putting it into a long-term care policy and end up at a point that I'd have more money in the end to cover this? You can't do it. I mean, if what I see, it just doesn't work that way. Now, maybe someone else can run the math and see it, but I couldn't get it to ever pencil when I tried to do this on my own side. Thus why covering this with some type of either insurance through a life insurance retirement plan or an actual policy makes sense because you're able to use mortality credits and other things to help you.
Dave, as I look at this, I see people who are looking at long-term care and they're going to come up with excuses and they're going to say, well, I need the break-even rate. I'm worried about taxes, as we discussed. I'm worried that my HSA won't cover this. They're worrying about so many other things and they're not really getting down to the detail. And what you're saying is you need to start before something happens.
Yeah, and they need to realize really what the end looks like. I tell people all the time, go to your local nursing home, go to your Medicaid facility, take a whiff once you get inside of there and see if that's where you want to be. Unfortunately, for many people, they're going to go, wait, I'm not sure this is where I want to end out my days. You know, look at the nice private facilities, go in there, see what's going on, check it out, get the pricing, do some homework, even in your 50s and 60s, because if you will, then it helps you make a better decision. Unfortunately, what we do is oftentimes we don't do any homework and we just think, oh, it can never happen to me. Well, then all of a sudden it happens to you and you're like, whoa, this is not what I thought. And had I prepared differently, I could have had a different experience.
And I think also we need to realize that not only going in and doing a visit, but actually looking at how much those places cost, because I don't think anyone really understands the amounts that cost that goes into a long-term care, especially once we're in a home.
No, and don't be so selfish you're going to put it on someone else either. You know, it's something I've not talked a lot about, but have had pretty strong feelings for. It's nobody else's responsibility to take care of you. Now, many of you will have a spouse. They'll be happy to do it. You're going to have kids. But you're putting a huge burden on them that doesn't need to be on their shoulders. And unfortunately, at times you're going to see situations where people become resentful because of the burden. You know, if you have to, hey, that's one thing. But if you have the means and the ability to solve the problem, solve it. Don't be so selfish. Use those funds to take care of those you love instead of making them take care of you.
And Dave, we talked a little earlier on the show. We talked about, man, if we have a hip issue, we had a hip replacement, we've got issues with our neck. I'm jumping down to bring up Kevin's, and Kevin said, well, Dave, is long-term care insurance available after receiving Parkinson's diagnosis?
Unfortunately, no, Kevin. Once you've gotten to a point where you've got these degenerating diseases, they're going to run as fast as they can from you because the companies are realizing a couple of things. Number one, the cost of the care is much higher than they expected. Cost of medicine's going up. It's costing them far more for people to get into these facilities. Not that they're necessarily staying longer than they projected, but the cost is just more. The other thing they're realizing, CR, is people are not dropping these policies at the rate of other insurance policies. That you have life insurance policies, auto insurance, they have certain rates that they know people are just going to drop out of the system on. Well, what's happening is people are buying these policies and they're not dropping them because they realize they need the coverage. They realize that they've got coverage has got to happen. So because of that, insurance companies are being forced to run away from any potential risk that might be there because they're already struggling from a financial standpoint to have the funds to cover these in the way they'd like to.
And Dave, you've mentioned on the show, and even in your webinars, how you've had your kidney replacement. How does that affect as we talk about long-term care also for those who may be seeing the same situation?
Yeah, any of these big issues you're going to have from a health side are going to affect your ability to get any type of coverage. Now, you can have situations like we had one this last week where someone's part of a large group and they're offering the coverage as part of the group without any medical testing or without any paperwork. Hey, if you've got medical issues, take advantage of it. Get signed up. You're never going to get that policy outside of the employer. One, you may never get it, but two, if you do, it's not going to cost you anywhere near what you're going to be able to pay inside of there. You're going to pay much less. So yeah, anytime you got a kidney transplant, you've had major issues, Parkinson's disease, whatever that you've been diagnosed with, it is going to affect your issues in getting long-term care, which also warrants getting it at a younger age. Most times we're not discovering these things until we get into our 50s or 60s. So let's start in our 30s and 40s to solve the issue before we ever get there.
And Dave, you've mentioned also, because this has come through genetics, through family, that you knew that this was coming. And so I think if people look at that, and it's not always something you look at and say, hey, I'm going to have this disease. But if you have something like this where you can kind of say, hey, it's most likely going to happen in my life, then you go out and make those decisions a lot earlier, like you said, because I feel like we're waiting until something happens and then we pivot and then make that choice. But by then you're at the door and it's kind of too late.
Yeah, we really like to bury our head in the sand and just pretend nothing's going to happen. And in my situation, it's not something that I did. And I wasn't guaranteed to have a kidney issue, 50-50 chance, but it was high enough chance. I said, look, I need to prepare myself for if this is to happen. I need to get disability insurance. I need to make sure that I'm taken care of from a life insurance standpoint with long-term care coverage, all these things that I put into place for myself, knowing that it could happen. Now, for some of my siblings, it didn't. They're, two of them were part of the statistics. Now we end up with 4 of us, so higher than 50%. But for the other 4 of us, unfortunately, my other 3 siblings did nothing prepare. And so they're all either in a bad situation now or going to be in a really bad situation at some point in the future.
And Dave, like we talked about before, we have people who are coming on and looking at long-term care, and they're just saying, I need to know everything before I make a decision. I want to make sure how it affects. And this brings me to Lynn's question, where she said, I'd like to know where the numerical stats are coming from for long-term care. Again, somebody's here saying, you proved to me why I need to purchase this. And I don't think we're looking at this the right way.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I mean, and you got to look at it in your own life. I talk about that all the time. We have statistics, we have averages. Well, that's all they are. They're statistics and averages. You've got to look at it in your own life and say, hey, if it's not important to you, and again, you've got somebody that's willing to take that responsibility and you're willing to put it on their shoulders, or you've got the funds to be able to cover it, they go ahead and move forward. But if not, you've got to figure it out yourself. And really, as a retirement risk advisor, that's my job. I identify risk. I'm going to tell you what the problems can potentially are. You then have to decide where you stand with those risks and what action you're going to take, and what action that'll have, not only what effect it'll have for you, but also for those that you love.
And I don't want to discount what Lynn's asking here, because I think the part that I'm trying to get at is we need more education. And as the prosperity guy, your job is to educate people to make sure they make the best decision. And along with that, it's making sure they're eliminating risk. And I think that's one thing that we're here to tell you is don't be afraid to ask questions. We're not going to beat on you for coming and asking these questions. What we're saying is get yourself educated so you can ask the right questions. So that way we're able to help lead you down the right path instead of saying, hey, go that direction and good luck.
Yeah, unfortunately, what we often want to do is we want to focus on others and we want to kind of divert from ourselves. Well, when it comes to retirement, it's all about you. Yeah, you got to take care of yourself. And we talk about it in some of the webinars we do with Tom Hegna. You don't have any responsibility to your kids or anyone else to leave them any money. Take care of yourself. Now, if you choose to leave them something, buy some life insurance and let them have the policy. Maybe they're going to get your house because you got to have a place to live until you pass away. But you have no responsibility for other people. It's really, what do you want? Once you can figure that out and you say, hey, I want this in my retirement. If this happens, I don't want the consequences. Then's when we take action. Then's when we put ourselves in a position to get ourselves where we need to be. I talk about it all the time, CR. You know, I was raised very poor. You live right down the street from where I was raised. And I looked at the life my parents offered me. Now, they loved me. I was extremely loved. I was grateful for that. But I look at the financial side of the struggle. My dad coming home from a labor job every day being just dead beat. You know, the problems my mom was having because she had to do so much around the house just to keep things going. Said, look, I don't want this for my life. And so I took steps to fix it. And I've not had a life at all that's like that, nor have my kids. But we've got to determine what it is. Now, if you're okay with that, that's fine. I'm not here to judge anyone on what they want, but you've got to decide what you want, and then you better take action to get there if you want really to have that lifestyle. And for many of you, you are going to have to take some type of action, or it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, very good advice. And again, for those watching live, I feel like we have a quiet crowd today, Dave, but we've got a lot viewing in. But if you have questions, I mean, go ahead and submit those. I mean, that's why we're here. We have this 30-minute segment broken out so you can come on and ask those questions. And again, it doesn't have to always be on the topic we're talking about. But I think a lot of times as we go through this, we start to get questions and we start to think to ourselves, okay, what can I be doing better? And so, Dave, one of the things before I get to our next questions is if somebody's watching and they're saying to myself or to their self right now, what can I do to get better? How do I prepare for retirement? Can they meet with you? Can they talk to you? Can they work through this with you to figure out what they can do?
Yeah, they absolutely can. We've got it structured to where you can meet with myself, members of my team, to where we can really help you start taking action. We meet with people every day. In fact, usually 4 to 5 new people a day that we're talking to help them better understand where they need to be, where they're heading, and what they can do for their retirement.
And so again, if you go to theprosperityguy.com, you can go check out the strategic session there. And once you click on that, you can fill out the form and have a chance to meet with you, Dave, for the no-fee consultation. And I think if the quicker you take advantage of that, the quicker you'll be able to get those answers and get yourself moving. Because again, we've done this for a long time, it feels like now. And we've had, like, I think you said 8,000 or 9,000 questions come in. So many people are trying to get those questions answered before they move. But it's kind of one of those things you need to kind of be moving as you're learning in order to really take advantage of what we're talking about.
Absolutely. And I do have some good news for the listeners. I will tell you, CR, they are quiet today, but they're not drunk. I'm noticing all of a sudden that my camera is like completely sideways. So for the that thought you were just having, maybe you would go to get your vision checked. Come back. I don't know why it was such a weird.
I did look at that and I thought, man, is my computer somehow crooked? So I did see that.
Yes. What it is, just figure out what the Kool-Aid thing. Well, it's just odd reason camera way off today.
Well, Dave, let me jump over to Barbara's question. And she's asking, does long-term care insurance cover unskilled care?
Yeah, it does. And this is really the big issue we have with long-term Medicare. And we look insurance program cover the skilled care need for even for a long-term situation. Skilled, what the long-term care, skilled, that's where the problem is. Very seldom do we have high bills from a skilled side. Daily, bathing, maybe feed you. You got to be in a facility where someone 24 hours a day. That's all unskilled care. That's why we buy long-term insurance, or we have a life retirement plan that allows that death benefit early, so we can cover these costs that the typical insurances aren't covering and Medicare is not covering.
Dave, is there anything with long-term care that we need to be aware of that maybe it doesn't cover that we really think it does?
Biggest issue is that most of them have a 90-day window at least. So, that's a deferral waiting period. So if you have a long-term care event initially, you're going to have to wait 90 days. Outside of that, most of them are going to be based upon the policy you have. Now, there are situations where it may be a reimbursable plan up to a certain dollar amount. So if you go over that dollar amount every day, you're not going to get those additional things paid for. It may be for a period of time. Maybe it's only for 1 or 2 years. Well, if you stay in the facility longer than that, they're not going to cover. So not necessarily, you can cover everything pretty much, excluding that initial benefit period where they all wait. But outside of it, you can cover everything. It's just, are you willing to pay for it to cover all of those costs?
All right, Dave, I'm going to jump over to, and I apologize, some of these names I will totally slaughter, but Sudha, it's the best I can do. But he said, what is the benefit period? Is this annual?
Yeah, so that's really what we were just talking about, Sudha, is the benefit period is that 90-day delay period. And really, it's every time you're going into a long-term care event. Now, for most people, it's one and done. You're not going in and out of those facilities. Once you get in, either the only way out, unfortunately, is usually in a pine box. But it's kind of a one and done thing. But if you were lucky enough to be one of the small percentage that gets in and comes back out, you would have that period again next time you went into the facility.
And Dave, do you see anybody that's just trying to get right into this program? Because it doesn't seem like to me people want to rush to get there, but it seems like sometimes we're making some rash decisions in order to kind of get to that next level.
Yeah, no, we really don't. I mean, when we look at it, in fact, it's one of the biggest fears people have. It's that uncertainty where we're used to our homes, we're used to the life we have. All of a sudden, maybe we feel our freedoms are being taken away. And really probably the biggest issue I see, once you take someone's car away and where they live, they really feel like their lives completely got disrupted, and come to the realization life will never be the same. I think that's the other thing. So if we can prepare ourselves, though, we can really think through there and understand why things are being done. It can be a much better experience for everyone.
I think we were talking earlier this week or last week, and you were talking about how you'd just be super excited to be wheeling around the place, giving high fives and harassing people the whole time if you were in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And people may think it's strange. I know most people, especially in a wealthy position, want to be at home. But again, if my wife has got to deal with the burden of all of that, and my kids have to deal with the burden of all that, I've got kids that would, I know. But I don't want to put that burden on them. Let me be in a facility where others can take care of me. That's their job. They're getting paid to do that. I would be very happy to be in a facility. And if my wife passes before me, for sure, because, hey, I like to be around people. And unfortunately, that's another issue many retirees have, is once you're dependent upon your kids' schedules, and some of them may not even live close, or all of them, it can be very lonely. And I see it with grandparents. I see it with people we work with. That can be a very lonely time. So again, it's going to work different for everyone. But yeah, I'm happy to go in that facility if my card's called at some point in the future.
And Dave, I try to lump these together. So Sudha was asking the same question we were talking about, and Gary's very similar to this one. Again, they're just trying to get kind of the understanding basics, but he said, is the 100 days about 3.5 months per event, or a lifetime cap?
Usually that's per event. So you've got to look at, again, your policy will identify what that is, but most of them it's per event.
And Dave, so if we're looking at this, the best advice is, like you're saying, it's per event. So I'm assuming, so that's 90 days for each one of those events. Is that right?
Yeah. So what's happening is they're saying, look, we're not going to cover that. And again, various ones work various ways. Some of them are going to require you to come out of pocket for that 90 days. Now, others may be where you say, hey, look, my family's going to take care of me for the first 90 days. Doctor said I've got problems. Family's going to take care of me for free the first 90 or 100 days. And then at that point, the insurance will step in. But you need to understand how that policy works. Because if you think that the family's going to take care of you, and then after 90 days, they'll kick in, you can go into a facility and pay for it, you may be very surprised when you get to the end of that 90 days and realize that your 90 days hasn't started because you haven't started incurring costs for a long-term care event.
And so where do these people go for that time? Because again, there's this anticipated time, but if they're not doing this and they're not prepared, what happens?
Well, remember on Medicare side, they're going to cover the first 20 days. So if you look at it, that they're going to help cover some of that on there. They're going to cover potentially the next 80 days as a copay, but you've got to pay $187.50 per day as your portion of that copay. So reality, you just got to have money set aside. I mean, that's the reality. It's like a deductible for any other insurance. They're saying, hey, look, you got to have some extra money set aside to cover this, because we're not going to step in until you do.
Dave, well, I'm going to end this here. We've got almost short to our 30 minutes, but I wanted to see if I could get your final thoughts, because today has been a really great discussion. We've been on task the whole time talking about long-term care, a time bomb for your retirement. But what advice do you have to leave with those who are watching this on replay that come on and say, is long-term care even right for me? Or do I need to make sure my parents are getting this before they get too far in retirement? How do we respond, and what do we say to them?
So my answer to people is you've got to figure it out. Now, again, if you're in a situation where you're living off Social Security, hey, you're going to end up in a Medicaid facility anyway. So you might as well face the fact and deal with it. There's no need to buy insurance that really is probably not going to provide you a better situation anyway. But if you are trying to solve the issue, you've got to start doing it now. And long-term care policy may be an option. Personally, I like the life insurance retirement plans, which we've not talked a lot about, but it's where you're using life insurance and taking the death benefit early because it's have something left if you don't have a long. If you end up passing peacefully and there's the policy position, will at least benefit that policy out. Do some education, get yourself figured out what's going to the estimated cost somewhere between $400,000. If you look at private studies, are you ready for that? What effect would that have? And especially for the married spouse. Usually we've got a husband than the wife end up living longer. She's the one that gets left, not always, but often that's the case. You need to them. Don't leave them. They're going to already lose the Social Security or part of it, not most, but they'll leave part of the security. They may lose your pensions if you've got pensions that are for your life. Get $500,000 long-term care event. You've really just ruined their retirement again because you failed to prepare and put things in place.
Yeah, and such great advice, Dave. I want to thank you again for being here for our Facebook and YouTube Live. I want to thank those who've been here with us live today and also those on replay. If you have questions that you want to get answered, if you didn't feel comfortable sharing them here today, go ahead and submit those at theprosperityguy.com. Go on the contact page and submit that question there, and we'll be able to get those in future shows. But until then, thank you for being here and being part of our show with us. And we'll see you guys again next Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time, and we'll see you then.
See you next week.